So we are now going to move into our next panel, which is going to be Community Cat Experiences by Animal Control. Our moderator for this event is Jerrica Owen. She's an accomplished animal welfare professional. Jerrica Owen joined the National Animal Care and Control Association in April of 2021 as the Director of Partnerships and Programs. She brings with her nearly 20 years of experience in emergent animal welfare, engaging and developing a diversity of staff, shelter operations, and leading successful initiatives in animal welfare in a cross-cultural environment. Previously, she was the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the San Diego Humane Society. Jerrica supported achieving success on the organization's primary strategies. In addition, she was the Senior Animal Response Team leader for the San Diego Humane Society's emergency response team and has extensive experience in the field during some of our country's worst disasters, supporting tactical and shelter operations for all types of animals, including domestic, wildlife, and equine. Our panelists are Michelle Dawson. Michelle Dawson is the Bureau Manager for the Norfolk Animal Care and Adoption Center in Norfolk, Virginia. We also have Jennifer Toussaint. And Jennifer is the Chief of Animal Control in Arlington County, Virginia at the Animal Welfare League of Arlington. And then we also have Mike Wheeler. Mike currently serves as the Director of Community Services for the City of Cabot, Arkansas. And their full bios are in your schedule, and I encourage you to read through their full bios. But in the interest of time, I'm going to hand things right over to Jerrica.
All right, so thank you so much, Stacy, and welcome everybody. It looks like we have 111. That's amazing. So I hope everybody is having a fabulous weekend, learning lots, all things cat. So this is fantastic. We are thankful for Stacy for allowing us to join you today. I'm really excited. We have the pick of the litter when it comes to the panelists. So I'm excited to work with this group and to really bring to life and share with you all of the exciting programs that they have, including successes as well as barriers. So we're going to talk everything in between. So let's just go ahead and launch right into having each panelist introduce themselves a little bit more and tell us about your program. So we will start with Michelle.
Put me on the spot. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jerrica. So right now I'm in a kind of awkward stage where I'm transitioning out from Norfolk Animal Care Center, and I'm going to be working with Best Friends Animal Society and their life-saving programs in Utah. And it's pretty interesting because the two different states have totally different legislative issues and barriers, and particularly with community cats. And I'm really excited to dive into Utah. But most of what I'm going to be talking about today will be my experience in both Austin, Texas and Virginia, and they also both have completely different barriers. So our programs in Norfolk, we don't actually have community cat supported programs out of the shelter. We have some legislative barriers that we are working on, and that's also something that I want to heavily talk about today, and how, when you hit a wall, how do you navigate that, and who do you talk to, and how do you talk to them, and all of those things, like collaborating with different stakeholders. So it's a little different. In Austin, Texas, we had a very robust community cat program it was completely volunteer run, and that comes with a whole nother set of resources needed and barriers and opportunities in itself.
Fantastic. We're looking forward to hearing more from you. Let's move over to Mike. Mike Wheeler, do you want to share with us a little bit about your program and your experience?
Sure. I'm Mike Wheeler, and I'm from Cabot, Arkansas, just so everybody knows where we're from here. We actually have I would consider a great community cat program. We passed legislation 2 years ago, so there's not a healthy stray that comes in that doesn't go right back out to the street within 2 days, right where it was found. So, and we'll talk more about how my officers do that, and it's great. Worked well for me, so.
Fantastic. Looking forward to hearing more. And Jennifer, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Jerrica, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Jennifer Toussaint. I'm the Chief of Animal Control at the Animal Welfare League of Arlington. The Animal Welfare League of Arlington has been serving Arlington County, Virginia for approximately 80 years. Our community cat program was founded in 2011. As Michelle talked about, we do have some legislative barriers here in the state of Virginia, but our program has now eclipsed 10 years of service to the Arlington County community. We had strong community feedback and push, including local legislators who wanted to see a community cat program run through our nonprofit/municipal shelter. We are a shelter that has a community contract, so we are 50% funding public, 50% funding private, which is how animal control operates out of the league as well. So I'd love to talk about some of the ways you can work around some of those legislative barriers if they exist, and the successes we've seen in the 10 years that we've run our program.
Fantastic. And that will naturally transition into our first topic. So we are going to start with you, Jennifer. So as you mentioned, you're located in Virginia, which we know has a unique set of those legislative barriers. So are you able to share a little bit about the legislative barriers themselves and then some tactics for overcoming them?
Yeah, so the biggest or easiest way to explain this is there is no specific law that clearly, explicitly prohibit or permits TNR. So there's not a law that comes straight out and tells organizations like mine that they're capable of doing this kind of work, or nonprofits who would like to engage in this kind of work. Like every law relating to animal welfare, our laws are very intricate. But we like to call them the adequates here in the state of Virginia. In animal control, I see Michelle laughing. Adequate care, transportation, food, water, shelter, all of the adequates, which kind of come down to basic care requirements in other states. So feral cats are a companion animal as defined in the state of Virginia. Our law literally starts as companion animals are defined as feral dogs, dogs are feral dogs, cats are feral cats. So, so we had to work with our community cat caretakers to make sure they were meeting those requirements. So upholding the requirements as stated in the law explicitly. So some of the ways we worked around that is we have to have caretakers. We cannot just return to field. These animals have to be retrieved from our organization by designated caretakers who sign care agreements. And we can kind of talk about how that works in ways that we support them, like food subsidies, shelter subsidies, and free revaccination, as well as preventative. So, so making sure that those cats are receiving the care that they are needed under the law. But yeah, it's an interesting workaround, but it really works. And a lot of organizations, I think, shy away from the concerns that they see, or the explicits, like, well, it doesn't say it's permitted, so that must mean it's prohibited. And our organization has invested lots of time, energy, and money into showing that you can work even if the laws don't explicitly say that things are permitted.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting and fantastic. Michelle, you're also located in Virginia. Do you want to speak a little bit about your experience with some of the legislative obstacles and barriers?
Yeah, and it's this past year has been really interesting to me because having run community cat programming and being in animal sheltering for so long, I didn't necessarily understand that I had such a one-sided, heavily weighted point of view on this issue. I thought that I was pretty well informed until I got invited to join a free roaming cat legislative working group for the General Assembly. And we've been meeting for the past several months, and it includes all kinds of stakeholders. And it's really important, I think, for me, it's a big takeaway for me when I realized that in my mind, when I heard free roaming cat working group, I went straight to TNVR. My mind was like, okay, well, clearly this is the only documented way to humanely help mitigate the population of free roaming cats. And I very quickly learned that, you know, there are varying opinions in the working group. TNVR is even tough for a lot of them to even just talk about, while at the same time not really bringing any other actual solutions to the table. But it was eye-opening seeing what the opposition to TNVR really is. You know, everything from wildlife to bird conservancy to public safety, property owner rights. And while we worked through these sessions, we actually ended up not getting to a point where we agreed on anything for this session, but we also, for the first time in 15 years, agreed to not introduce any new bills to the table so that we would not set our progress back. So we're going to continue to work for the next session, but it's interesting. I thought you think you know things, and then you get a whole load of information from people who either oppose TNVR or have other ideas on how to, control our free roaming cat population. And I'm working on our local legislation as well, because I learned a whole lot from the state group. But I feel like compromise when you go into these sessions and talking to people and having an open mind and receiving the information that they're giving you and coming to obviously, I say obviously, but it's not always obvious, identifying a key commonality. Like, we all want less free roaming cats, right? And if there are certain sticking points, such as not calling them community cats, if that is something that is going to open up 5-hour-long discussion and the opposition to what you're trying to achieve really likes free roaming cats, then that is like something that I'm not really concerned with. I personally don't care what we call cats that are outside. I just want us to come to a point where we can agree on how to help animals outside and control those populations. So working in Virginia, going back to Norfolk, we have some local legislation that I am working on to actually allow for community cat programming or free roaming cat programming. I think I'm going to change all the wording to that. This is very recent that we came to that, getting buy-in from stakeholders. And it's realizing that I'm not going to get everything that I want in an ordinance, but also realizing that compromise is maybe going to be the key to success here from all parties. So we're working through that, and we'll see where it goes. But I think that if we can do it on the local level, then we can definitely get there on the state level. So anybody who's got some state barriers, I would say get involved. Try to start working on those working groups. If you do have any governor-appointed working groups, try to get in on that. But it's kind of mind-blowing when you sit down and talk to people who don't have the same ideology around free roaming cats around you, and you come to this conclusion where there'll be, after several months of long conversations, there'll be a light at the end of the tunnel where you both realize that you actually do agree on several points, and that's like a good basis to keep moving forward. I'm just really proud of people making progress and not going backwards, hitting walls where we just vehemently do not agree, but working through them to get to the ultimate goal of how to control free roaming cat populations.
Thank you. Fantastic. Really interesting information. So as you and Jennifer and Virginia are working, on changing legislation and bringing all the stakeholders to the table, Mike, it sounds like your agency and state have had 2 years of this legislation at least already passed. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the legislative barriers that you maybe had prior, and how it's kind of working now in terms of it being not a barrier?
Well, Arkansas, like a lot of states, is a home rule state, which means local governments, they control their cities. So that's been beneficial to us. But our barrier, legislative-wise, was actually something I put in place. When I wrote our TNR ordinance back in 2013, it only allowed for caretakers, like Jennifer discussed earlier. So we, as a shelter and as an animal control facility, we had no authority to pick up and release cats. We had no authority over anything other than the caretaker themselves. So that was our biggest legislative barrier. 2 years ago, we flipped that script. I wrote a new ordinance that completely got rid of the feral cat philosophy of trap, neuter, and return. And now everything we've listed and Michelle may not like this after her last comment, but everything is a community cat. And so we've gotten rid of all the caretakers, all of the colony requirements and everything. Now we just have to spay them, neuter them, microchip, vaccinate, ear tip, and put them back out. And also the other barrier we had was Cabot actually had a leash law on cats, on an owned cat, which is just crazy. But we've had it. And this ordinance also got rid of that leash law. So now an owned cat could be inside or outside as long as it still fit in those, those microchip, spayed, neutered, rabies, ear tipped. So we consider every cat as owned now in the city of Cabot. It makes it much easier. My officers, we don't trap cats unless they're a nuisance anymore. These are strays that are brought in or caught, and we come pick them up. We take care of them, and then my officers, this is what's different in Cabot than a lot of places. My officers actually take the cats back to the field where they were found in broad daylight. We're not ashamed of what we're doing. So we take them out in uniform in their animal control trucks in the middle of the day, and we release them. And it's been great. Do we have people question? Yes. But legislatively, we had no issues because we brought data to the table when we met with city council in the mayor's office. What a lot of folks don't understand is, as little as we know, we're still the experts in this, okay? So even though I don't know everything there is to know, and I'll never know as much as Monica does, for you folks that know Monica Friend, I'll never know even a portion of what she knows. I'm still more of an expert in here than my city attorney is. So if a little word of advice here, if you're waiting on your city attorney or your county attorney to write your ordinance for you, or to write your resolution for you, you failed already. You need to bring that to them. They're more apt to just review it and move forward than to write a new one, because if they write a new one, it'll be 22 pages long, and you'll never be able to enforce it. So anyway, there you go, Jerrica.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, on that, so on the heels of that, in regards to educating and really, I guess, more speaking with the public, regarding humane and responsible coexistence of the care of community cats and pet cats, what have you found to be most effective? And this can be to any of you. What have you found to be the most effective when communicating with your community?
Well, I'll jump in real quick. We didn't blast social media. We didn't send out great press releases when this passed. We didn't bring national attention to us. We just did it. We had our 3 readings at city council. It was voted in. We did it. We put it on our website. We changed all of our website, and then we educate as we go. And that's worked for us. It doesn't bring in everybody from all the other states around us that want to jump on social media and bash us. And now we're 2 years in, those folks who do jump on social media and want to bash us, we have 2 years worth of data. We can say, this works. I have 2 cats in my shelter where I'd normally have 100. We pick up 1 deceased cat every 3 months on our streets. So they're not dying out there. That was how we handled the education portion. We do it one person at a time.
Arlington kind of had the exact opposite. So it might be because Arlington County, Virginia is a little bit about us, obviously being the proximity to the nation's capital. We cannot do that in any way, shape, or form. Our county manager and county board would absolutely die if we thought about doing that. We passed an exotic animal ordinance a number of years ago. It took 13 drafts and 2.5 years to tell people in urban Arlington County they couldn't own lions, tigers, and bears. So just like as a comparison for when we do these kinds of shifts. So we had the good graces of the backing of some really great local rescues, right, who were willing to come to our community and support the shelter. So we are the only shelter in Arlington County, and for many, many years, we would euthanize feral cats. So they would come into the shelter, they would not be adoption candidates, and we would euthanize them. And just basic talking with caretakers, populations were continuing to skyrocket to the level of like us getting community concerns about seeing as many cats as they were in certain neighborhoods. And honestly, I remember, 11 years ago as an officer driving through certain neighborhoods, and you could count to 20 cats sitting on public sidewalks on certain blocks. So I understood why we were getting calls. We had to do more of a localized approach when we found out or decided that we were all going to embark on this journey together. We sat down with the county manager, county board staff, and our contract managers and talked about ways that we could proactively address this. We found that every neighborhood had a different concern. So like one neighborhood, we would go to an HOA and everybody wanted to talk about toxoplasmosis. And then we would go to a different community event or civic association and everybody wanted to talk about the wildlife concern aspect of it. So we kind of had to branch out and take a bunch of us across our organization and break out into doing these community presentations to talk about like, well, okay, we've tried this for, we're at that point, we were at like 70 years of service to the community. We have not decreased your community cat population. We would like to try something new. We had grant funding, so this was not going to be taxpayer funded, which was a great moving forward point in our community. People liked to hear that we were going to try something new and it wasn't going to be at cost to them. And that we were going to be open and authentic through the process. We were going to post data. We were going to tell people how things were going. We were going to be honest if we hit barriers, as well as being honest with the legislators locally and talking through issues as they arise, especially relating to human health. Right, that was a big concern from the legal aspect, the county legal aspect. Rabies is endemic in wildlife populations. State of Virginia, we get rabid animals monthly in Arlington County in our wildlife population. So this was a huge concern in the higher levels. But now, so last year, 10 years of service, we see a 70% decrease in colony size and an 82% decrease in cat euthanasia at our open admission shelter. So like you said, Mike, that those stats, they really help once you can get them under your belt. Unfortunately, initially, we kind of had to go out on the limb and say, let us please try something different.
And so I will talk a little bit about Austin, Texas, and then also Norfolk. If you're lucky enough, like Mike, to be able to get it in under the radar, that's amazing. If you can get it in with not really sneaking it through, but like telling people who need to know and educating as you go. And you said that, and that is just such a key point. Educate as you go. And I'll use a little example back in Austin when we first started doing return to field SNR, whatever you call it. Whenever a healthy cat comes into your shelter, you spay, neuter, vaccinate, and you put it out back to where it came from. Healthy cats, qualifying cats. We weren't exactly telling everybody right in the beginning. We were just saying, okay, cool. The cat was presented as a stray. So we think, oh, this is, lives in the neighborhood. It's got 5 feeders, it's got 5 owners, it's got 5 names. Let's put it back after sterilization surgery and vaccination. And what happened was, this is just one example, that cat was actually mispresented to us. It was actually supposed to be an owner surrender, but that person was feeling guilty for whatever reason, and that's a whole nother discussion of topics. But because we did not discuss our policy, like our new SNR return to field policy, that person didn't realize we were just going to put the cat back. And 5 days later, 4 days later, the cat showed back up at their step with an ear tip, and they were mortified because not only was their cat back, they had no idea that it was going to be put back. So having those conversations, and somewhat difficult conversations with presenters, not to make them feel a certain type of way, but in the best interest of those animals as well, because you do not want to be returning ideally, you don't want to be returning someone's pet who's probably may have never been outside before back into the community. So that was kind of like an aha moment for us, where we're like, okay, now we have to go full blast with communication and put it on social media and start talking about it. And I mean, I know that's kind of scary sometimes, depending on your community. You don't know how they're going to receive it. But if you involve stakeholders and get them on board, have the conversations about why, and we do this regularly, and I'll move into Norfolk, Virginia. We have regular meetings after hours, just with different rescue groups, different stakeholders, different groups of volunteers, depending on what the topic. And we just discuss, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, what do you think? And what are your ideas? What can you bring to the table on this particular topic? And for community cats, it meant for us, we're not able to return to field through our shelter at the moment, but we do have several really amazing partners who are able to do the work that need to get done independently of the shelter. And you know, I talk about this because yes, it may be a way to work around an ordinance, but there are absolutely no laws being broken in this process. And not trying to, like Jennifer said, I happen to be based in Norfolk right now, where another international organization that I work very closely with almost on a daily basis, who vehemently opposes to the concept of returning healthy cats back into the community. And my MO is never to, you know, I want to be communicative and transparent and work with people, because I know that it depends on your community. I know that organization, there's nothing that's going to slip by them, and there's no reason to push that, because you'll be doing a whole lot of work for it to get squashed on the back end. And that's not really, for my community, that is not the way that they would accept any kind of change proposal. I have to go through the whole rigmarole of communicating, our communications department, our city attorney's office. And Mike, to your point, you are right. Your attorney's office, they're relying on us to be the subject matter experts. And I learned pretty early on that if I wanted something changed or updated, all I had to do was suggest what I thought was going to be, you know, within our state legislation, because Virginia is a Dillon's law where we do not have sovereignty, which is, yeah, in itself a barrier. But my attorneys depend on me to suggest updates and amendments. And for me, I go to my stakeholders, even if they're like, no, you're crazy, this is never going to work, we will never, ever support this. I go to them for their input first, because I know ultimately my council is not going to want to pass something that causes, you know, so much uproar and opposition within our community. And my community definitely has very polarizing opinions on community cats, and I'm sure a lot of you guys out there too have the same types of communities.
Fantastic, thank you. I really like that we're sort of hearing all these different perspectives and points of view, and what may work in one state or community or city may not work in another. So it's great that we're sort of hearing all these different suggestions and experiences. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, and we're going to move into more implementation questions. And what I'd like to hear from each of you is the intake triage process. We have a specific question that was submitted. When a cat maybe that escaped its caretaker or was possibly dumped, and maybe it joins a colony, but then it's brought to the shelter, the organization. Can you kind of walk us through your triage process, and maybe just sort of tell us and the audience what different things work well for your team and your community, and maybe, like Mike said, it's everybody goes back. Just walk us through a little bit about that process. So Jennifer, can we start with you?
Sure. So tricky question. So cat is dumped, literally happened like 2 days ago at our front door in a carrier, opened it up. She's got the indentation of a collar. She's friendly. She stays. Adoption candidate, right? So check the box, super simple. So we now we're 10 years later. So cats being dumped at our organization is very rare. We do not charge a surrender fee. I think sometimes that can be a barrier, or, increase some of those concerns. But just general, so they come in through caretakers. So we have signed agreements before we authorize trapping. We have trapping laws in Arlington County that are a little different than some other jurisdictions in the state of Virginia. So you can't just run around setting traps in our community, which is nice because it kind of keeps our hands on the work at all times. So we pre-sign up for appointments. We actually have a dual program now. So caretakers can opt to have to receive vouchers for surgery at a local animal hospital. And so the caretakers trap, they take those animals to the animal hospital, spay, neuter, vaccinate, air tip, all the good stuff. And then we actually just pay the bill. So does it get any easier than that? No. But for when they come into the shelter, so part of our caretaker agreements explicitly states, and I can talk about this later, Jerrica, I think you have a question that talks about like aha moments, but we are very clear that if we believe the cat is an adoption candidate, that we have the legal authority to keep the cat, for the cat to go on view for adoption. Our caretakers know this up front. Actually, sometimes they will get excited and say, you know, I've been working with this cat for the last 6 months. Can you come like reevaluate it for adoption? And we will absolutely do that. If it is also younger, we have a kitten college program. And so those young guys to socialize cats will stay with us. And we also have the legal authority to euthanize if our overseeing vet believes the cat to be in a condition of which it should not be returned to the caretaker, understanding that it will live predominantly outside. So all of that will happen, right? So they're anesthetized. Our vet team will do these surgeries on designated days after doing shelter animals. We have an entire veterinary suite on site. I know some animal shelters don't have that luxury. We do. And so all of that will happen, and then the cats will stay. They will be evaluated the following day to ensure that spay neuter, everything looks good, that everything's on the up and up. They receive injectable pain medication rather than oral because they are community cats. And then we work with the caretakers, and the caretakers come to the organization to retrieve them or to the animal hospital, depending on whether or not they've been done on-site or off-site. And the caretakers bring them back, and they are asked, some of them, we'll talk with them about, you know, keeping them inside for a day or two to release outside. And then some of the caretakers will just immediately release themselves. Caretakers really know their cats. The other thing I really want to point out, like really, really please respect and understand that the caretakers have a really good finger on things. They're very insightful, and they really know the needs of the cats that they're bringing in.
Yeah, I would agree. Michelle or Mike, do you have anything to add on the triaging process? Is yours different? Does it look similar?
Right. So ours is really heavily conversation and situation dependent right now. And I know that's not a cut and dry, black and white intake protocol, but I do want to say in the state of Virginia, our state law does not necessarily speak to shelters having to impound cats at all at shelters. It only really talks to, and Jennifer, I don't know if you have anything to elaborate on that, but long story short, shelters are not mandated to intake cats. That being said, the Norfolk Animal Care Center does intake cats. It just depends on the situation, because we are very limited as to what resources we are able to offer, or any type of outcome other than, unfortunately, euthanasia when a fractious or non-adoption candidate cat comes into our shelter and one of our partners cannot pull it. So that being said, we are very realistic, and we have really open conversations. They are difficult with the presenter. It all depends on, you know, why are you trapping? Are you feeding? And if you, a lot of times when people are presenting traps, cats and traps to us, healthy cats and traps, sick and injured, always immediate intake. Just wanted to say that. Healthy cats and traps, they end up being the unintentional caretaker as well. So when we have conversations versus just taking that cat in and knowing that we really have very limited options for live outcome for that cat, or any options for that cat other than euthanasia, we get to know people and we figure out, oh, they're actually, you know, feeding 20 cats, and they intend on trapping all of them and bringing them to us. And they did not necessarily know that by bringing them to us in the situation we're in right now really does not give that cat a high outcome at a live outcome. They're basically, we have the conversation, like, we cannot house these cats here, and ultimately they're going to be euthanized, but these are the resources that we can offer you. And there are a bunch of our rescue partners who can come out and help with the TNVR, while also not promoting it, because we are not allowed to technically promote TNVR through our shelter at the moment. But, you know, reality is people simply did not know. that once they were presenting these cats to us, that they really were going to end up getting euthanized. And by opening those conversations and letting them know that, we've seen a big turn in the tides where we used to have these regular trappers just drop off 20 cats a year, and we had like 200 of those people. So there's a lot of cats that were just coming in and losing their lives. Now that we're setting these expectations of, you're playing a role in this cat's life by feeding it and caring for it, and finding out why this particular cat, they no longer want it there. Is it because it's fighting? Is it because it's straying? And offering spay-neuter resources and humane deterrent information, that really determines what we do with that animal. Long story short, though, if someone comes and presents an animal in a trap that's healthy and they are threatening to hurt that animal comes in, and we will utilize what resources we have to make sure that that animal gets a shot at a live outcome. So we're kind of working on a situation dependent, and hopefully once we get our local ordinance updated, which should be happening, the final draft, pretty soon, we won't have to dance around the subject, but it's not really dancing around the subject, but we wouldn't have to have these elaborate conversations on what we can do with this animal. We will just be able to say, these are the resources, this is what we can do for you because we're now allowed to do it, and then we'll create better relationships with our community and presenters of healthy cats and traps. And of course, those friendlies, they all come in, they have a mandatory holding period. We are not able to do RTF right now or SNR. So.
Thank you. Mike, anything to add before we switch to yours a little bit?
Just real quick, the mandatory holding period, Michelle just mentioned that. We actually got rid of the mandatory holding period in our last ordinance for cats only. So that helped out us tremendously. Other than that, just a couple of things. All cats come in, I've told you before, all cats come in healthy, fractious, doesn't matter if they're healthy and they're not owner surrendered, they go back out to the field. It's just that simple. If they're under 4 months old, we do hold them and adopt. If they're older than 4 months old, just for the time frame, then they are returned. Sick cats that come in. One other time frame we have is if they're sick when they come in, they'll be treated. And as long as the treatment doesn't last more than 90 days, they're released back into the field. So if it's 89 days out since treatment started and they're finally healthy, they go back to the field. Try to keep it simple.
Mike, you're living the dream.
It works in my world, Michelle. It works in my world.
It's amazing. And honestly, it's so important for people who are not necessarily, working in municipal sheltering, or you're maybe not even, you're a volunteer or you have a rescue. You really need to understand, what state you're in, what type of law you have in your state, and what your local jurisdiction is able to implement. And like case in point, this panel right here is a variety of everything. And it's so important for people out there who are rallying or maybe wondering about this to get involved in lobbying and your legislation, because you may think that you have no control, but you really do. Every single session, there's bills being put on the table that need your support. And maybe not your support, depending on the situation. But yeah, this is just such a wide variety of what we're able to do. But I think the takeaway for me is like not being disabled by what you perceive to be a barrier, and finding ways to work around, focusing on your mission and finding ways to work around and work with legislation.
I'm going to switch gears real quick before we go into some questions from the audience. One of the things that we wanted to talk about was sort of the animal control or the field services role in these programs. So would you mind each sharing a little bit about what specifically your field service or animal control officer's role is in your community cat programming? And Mike, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, my field services does pretty much everything. Unless, if a cat is brought into the shelter as a stray, my officers, like I said, they release them back on the street where they were found, broad daylight, in uniform. They're the ones having those face-to-face conversations. And by the way, this is the second conversation. When somebody brings in the animal, the cat, they're given all that information up front. The person is told to be released back. But when the neighbor doesn't know that, and my officers are out there on the street releasing cats in broad daylight, then they educate. But that's my officer's role. They do everything. And every time and also just so you know, every time they release a cat back in the public, they also put flyers on 3 doors on both sides of the street. That way, with the picture of the cat on it and saying this cat is a community cat, it was just released. And that was a lesson we learned about month 3, when Oscar kept trying to get into everybody's house. Okay, so we were called by everybody on that street. So we've learned now, we just post a few flyers on doors, and then when they see the cat, they know this is a community cat, and life's good.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, so here in the state of Virginia, because of some of the limitations, animal control can only do so much. We do not return to field, like I mentioned before, but we are required, the animal control department owns the community cat program. I know that's very atypical in a nonprofit shelter for the program to fall under animal control. It initially was under animal care, but about year 2, they realized that the animal control officers were the ones out there, boots on the ground, meeting all of these caretakers. And so to hand the caretakers off to a coordinator in a completely different department and kind of have to, do reintroductions, it didn't make any sense. Animal control officers could carry caretaker forms to get those signed in the field, to onboard those caretakers and talk about the requirements. We also are the ones out there to see the housing and talk to them about what appropriate feeding is, right, to prevent them from being a wildlife attractant, but to ensure that the cat's needs are being met. And then revaccination. We carry all of those vouchers to help caretakers stay in compliance with vaccination requirements for rabies and things like that. And we just like interacting with them. It's part of being a resource-based animal control team. You're going to go door to door, and you're going to be open-minded about all of the interactions that you have. So many of us actually now, 10 years later, I had a daughter. I got gifts from some of our community cat caretakers when I was pregnant. It's just that relationship that you work with these individuals. When you get to a property and somebody is feeding 80 cats, that person is going to be someone, as an animal control officer, you're going back out to that home many, many times over many, many years. And I'm proud to say we don't have any colonies over 10. When we first started, we had many, many colonies over 50. Like I said, we've seen that 70% decrease kind of across the board in colony size. But yeah, we do the hands-on work, and then our wonderful veterinary team does the heavy lift of care once they get to our facility.
Fantastic. Thank you. Michelle, do you have additional stuff to add before we jump into some questions here?
Yeah, I'll be quick because I know I can be long-winded, but so my background is heavy in field services, as animal protection, and animal protection, our NAPU, Norfolk Animal Protection Unit, doesn't actually report to me in Norfolk. I wish they did, because I love animal control officers, but they're under our police department. So I've been working quite extensively with their captain to help them kind of over the last couple of years progress with their stance on community cats or free roaming cats. Before, two years ago, they used to actively set traps by request for nuisance, or just because they had traps and they were going to put them out in the community. And those traps were then filled with cats, and they brought them to the shelter, and the shelter would euthanize them. That was the cycle. Now, the last couple of years, they no longer actively trap. They no longer will trap for people on request, but they will give out our resource for community cats and free roaming cats. So they are having conversations that it's no longer a service that they provide, because one, they're not mandated for it, which means most likely they're not funded for it, but they are resources for people to, help their community cat colonies. But also, as far as they take a public safety standpoint, and we work with a health department as well. And we don't look at like TNR or TNVR. It's really about focusing on that vaccination and controlling that population and having the conversations with people like that. If you've already set up you know, a safe haven, and you know that people are feeding that and not spaying and neutering, that is the issue. It's the issue aren't really the cats existing, because the cats are always going to exist whether you remove them. They will come back if you don't take the food source away, right? And so just having those conversations and helping our officers to have the tools that they need to have those conversations, and really just printing out resource packets so that they can give to people and leave, and they can contact the shelter directly or the rescue groups, partner organizations that we help with who have more TNVR resources.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've got quite a few questions submitted here. I will do my best to get to each of these. We're going to start with one about ear tipping. So Mike specifically asked of you, what you had mentioned ear tipping, and do you ear tip all cats since you put everything back out, or is there a determination of which ones get ear tipped and which ones do not?
No, we ear tip all cats.
Okay.
When we got rid of the leash law for cats and started allowing folks to have free roaming cats, part of that free roaming requirement, even for an owned cat, was an ear tip. That way we could see in the wild, and if we caught them, we would know immediately they belong to somebody else. So every cat gets ear tipped unless it's up for adoption.
Okay, so those who are on the adoption pathway are not ear tipped.
That's correct.
Okay, fantastic. What about if the community doesn't want the cats back, right? We hear that very often. If maybe they, and we know that humane deterrence and that kind of stuff, but how would you or your teams approach conversations with community members that just simply do not want the cats back in their neighborhoods?
Yeah, so we had a neighborhood in South Arlington. So Arlington County, Virginia, obviously very interesting history with the land in Arlington and the changes in ownership of land all throughout Arlington. We had a new development come into a certain neighborhood in South Arlington, part of gentrification, to be honest, really common in Arlington, and the shift in many of the communities we're seeing now. The cats preceded that development by like 50, 60 years that we could physically show in photographs. So when we went to the HOA to talk to them, we brought some of the history of that neighborhood with us to kind of talk to these residents that now lived on this land about how their view for the community cats were different to the actual neighbors that surrounded them. And that the history of these cats in the community ran deep, right? So you were seeing the great-great-great-grandchildren of cats that lived on these streets, 60, 70 years ago. And when we boiled down to it, it was a health concern. So we talked to them about the fact that we include preventatives in our follow-up care with caretakers, and that really quelled a lot of the concerns that community initially raised. So like Michelle said, though, these are individualistic conversations, right? You're going to have these as you go through, and you're going to be reasonable. And like you said, Jerrica, you already talked about humane deterrence, but yeah, there are solutions rather than just running out there setting traps and bringing cats in for euthanasia.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, we have a question here on wildlife. So, right, very common opposition to community cat programs, and oftentimes we know that these sort of ad hoc, lethal or non-lethal, has not been demonstrated to be really effective. Can you, anybody, share with us maybe how you dealt with some wildlife detractors or partners, how you work together in terms of overcoming some obstacles and barriers in regards to wildlife specifically?
Hi. Yeah. So with the wildlife conversation, it's really, I learned a lot. Most of the concerns come from like feeding and lack of restrictions around feeding. And there is no, well, in the state of Virginia, I should say, there is nothing that specifically regulates TNVR. And that's where a lot of their concerns come from, and the conversations were surrounding like, well, if I wanted to become, when I became a wildlife rehabber, I had to go through all of these trainings. And I mean, fair point, right? So you have people out there, and I don't necessarily believe that everything needs to be overly regulated, but once again, if you're looking to come up to a solution, understanding different points of view. So what we've been doing in Virginia, and some people are for it, some people are not for it, it's going to end up being quite an elaborate proposal where then we can then whittle it down. But I think it's really important to, you know, hear it out, put it all down on a piece of paper, and then figure out what is actually realistically going to happen. But without talking about legislation, like what we work with our wildlife rehabbers in Norfolk very closely, just trying to figure out how we can help them. So if there's somebody who's just out there feeding a bunch of cats and not really engaging in TNVR, and we get a complaint about it, we just have individual conversations. And I don't know if that actually answered your question, but it's pretty broad topic with wildlife concerns.
It very much is. So no, I appreciate that.
Jerrica, before you move on, can I mention something about wildlife?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So wildlife is something I'm actually exorbitantly passionate about. I've spoken nationally on wildlife topics, and I do a lot of continuing education for animal control relating to engaging in life-saving efforts for wildlife. I think that that's really a place that animal control is going to spend a lot of time in the next 10 years, especially as wildlife disease outbreaks continue to plague all of us across the continental US. Our organization leaned into wildlife at the exact same time we leaned into community cats. We told the community, we hear you, we understand that there are also gaps in needs for orphan injured wildlife, and let's see if we can pull off both, right? Does it need to be an and or kind of conversation? A lot of people think you either do one or the other. From 2013 to 2020, AWLA aided in the release to rehab or return to field of 2,181 injured orphan wild animals in our community. We keep very concrete stats on it, and we were actually chosen to be one of HSUS's Wild Neighbors pilot communities as a result of our humane wild urban management. So I think it's housed in the same animal control team of 7 people that serve a community of over 250,000, also dealing with community cats. So I will talk to a community caretaker. I will then call a rehabber to find transport for an injured squirrel. You can do it all.
I love that. I think that's so important, and what a fantastic way to approach it, right? Leaning into both at the same time, because it doesn't need to be an either or. There are lots of agencies and organizations working on both in tandem. So I think that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see, we've got one more question, and then we'll wrap up with some aha moments. Mike, what advice or guidance would you provide somebody who's trying to overturn hold times in their community? So one of our viewers has a hold time of 60 days. What is something that you might suggest to them to help work towards overturning that?
Well, first, I'd work on your language. Overturning is a horrible word. That's like pushback. I hate those words. It brings about an automatic defense by the other party. So don't look at it and going in and saying, oh, well, we're gonna overturn the 60-day rule. Let's go in instead with some data that says these locations are using a 7-day rule, and it's not the 7 days that's the important part. The important part is this many more animals got out of the shelter quicker. They had healthier lives, less euthanasias, less medical issues. Never focus on what they think you're going to focus on, and that's that 60 days. You're going to be focusing on the community, what's best for the community, what's going to save money, and what's best for the animal. Legislatures, as much as they say they're animal lovers, they really only care what people who vote for them care for. Okay, so if it will get them reelected, that's the direction you take. And if you're always doing what's best for the community, your path is so much easier. But try to get away from the negative terms and the words you use. If it automatically puts up a wall, then they're done, because that same legislature or that same city councilman, that same mayor has upheld that 60-day rule for their entire term in office. So now you're going in and telling them they've been wrong for 2 years. And you don't want to do that. Never do that.
Well, that was an aha moment for me. I mean, just simply using, right, that overturn, you're right, that instantly can put you on the defensive and sort of set that pathway in the wrong direction. So genius. Thank you for that. That was amazing. Okay, so we have 2 minutes. We're going to just wrap up real quickly. Final thoughts, aha moments, anything you would like to share with our audience on this topic specifically. We will start with Michelle.
I would encourage everybody to use data when you are setting up your community cat programming. If you know where your frequent flyers are, and I mean that if you analyze your neonate kitten intake, right, or your local municipal, whoever receives kittens and holds them, look where those kittens are routinely coming in from, and then target your TNR to those jurisdictions. And you can always expand. But if you want to make the biggest impact and life-saving, I would look specifically as to where you are trapping, neutering, and returning versus just going everywhere. And that's not saying that one life is more than another. It's just to make the biggest impact, use that data.
Go ahead, Mike, you want to share?
I would just say data is important, but also history is important. Help them understand that it's been less than 50 years since cats have actually been house pets. Okay, it's been less than 70 years since cat litter was invented. This will help people understand the time frames.
Go ahead, Jennifer, in the last minute.
Yes, so I would say if you're just starting this work or if you haven't done this in a while, recheck your paperwork. If you don't have clear agreements with the individuals bringing cats into your organization, if you don't have good trapping permits, if you are a municipal shelter and you're going to consider engaging in this work, make sure you're clear when people can and cannot trap, how appropriately checked the trap should be. We require hourly and not after 9 p.m. given our dense raccoon population in Arlington County. You want to set everybody up for success. And also be upfront about what you're capable of providing in continuing steps. Community cats are going to have emergent needs. They might be struck by a vehicle and not killed. When the caretaker calls you because they have a truly sick or injured animal, what is the next step? And have you already talked about that, hopefully with those people prior to the emergency? Because if you go into that emergency and you've never had that conversation, it's so much more difficult than if you've pre-discussed with them what your organization can and cannot provide for community cats and what is and is not appropriate once those emergent situations arise. So be upfront, be authentic, and be honest.
Fantastic. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to Stacy and the Community Cats podcast team for